This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. Today, we are talking with Lisette Austin, who is going to have a very special role here at Adoptees On. And I'm not going to spoil exactly what that is. We are going to tell you later on in our interview. But truly, she is one of my good friends. She is a fellow podcaster. And in our conversation today, we talk a lot about what it's meant for Lisette to discover more about her Black biological family using DNA matching. And she has a passion for travel and genealogy. And we're going to touch on all of those topics. But I really have struggled to introduce her to you because this episode is kind of like a milestone marker in the life of Adoptees On. And there's a lot of buildup here because it's a big deal. And so Lisette has been a Patreon supporter for a number of years. And there's so many of you that also are. Patreon is the crowdfunding way I run the show. And that's how I can pay people to edit. And now I have people doing some freelancing for me, whether that's doing communications with you on social media or some graphic design, helping with book club, all of those kinds of things. I am so honored that you trust me with your money so I can produce this show for you every week. This is one of the reasons why we've come to this moment in the podcast. I'll tell you more about it in the end of the show, so stick around and I'll chat a little bit more. But we're really thrilled to introduce you to Lisette today, and knowing that you are going to get to know her more to come makes me really happy. Don't be nervous. This is a happy moment. We're going to tell you the big news. And we will, as always, give you our recommended resources, and links to everything we'll be talking about today are over on our website, adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Lisette Austin. Welcome, Lisette.
Thanks so much, Haley. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so thrilled to talk to you. I'd love it if you would start the way we usually do. Would you share some of your story with us?
Absolutely. My pleasure. So let's see. I was born in Seattle, Washington in 1970, closed domestic private adoption, and grew up the only child of an interracial couple. And I am half Black, half white. And so my adoptive father was Black from Virginia, and my adoptive mother was white, French Canadian from Montreal. And so that was kind of convenient and a bonus. So I, always knew that I was adopted. I apparently was told when I was 4. I don't remember that. So I just always knew, as far as I remember. And I did know a little more, I think, than most closed adoption adoptees at the time, because my adoptive father was a child psychiatrist, and his colleague was my birth mother's counselor. And so apparently, I don't know if this part of the story is actually true, but apparently she had expressed some concerns to this therapist about the fact that, this baby may not be wanted because it's part Black, who knows? She's very young. She was 15 when she got pregnant. So he was like, oh, well, actually, I know this couple and they can't have kids, and one is Black and one is white, and it's perfect. I know they'll be thrilled. So that's kind of how the story went. That's what I always heard. And so it was arranged privately, and I was in the hospital 6 days alone, although my adoptive mother was very frustrated about that. She was a nurse at the time, and that's how they met, nurse and a doctor. And she was like, somebody needs to let me in to see that baby now. Like, this is critical time. This child is alone. So actually, she had some thoughts about that. She had some awareness about this important time. However, they did not let her do that. Thank you, hospital. So very frustrating for her. Probably not so great for me at all. But after 6 days, I went home. So that's sort of the beginning of the journey. Speeding up, well, we'll just say I was not like the angry adoptee. I was not, well, I wasn't angry about that. I had other anger came out in other ways later. But at the time, I wasn't angry about that. I always felt like, well, yeah, I was adopted. She was young. These people wanted me. It all worked out. And people didn't believe me when I told them I was adopted because I looked like my parents in a way. And also the black-white thing. They were just like, oh, no, you're not. I had to argue with people all the time about it. So I didn't have that part, which was, I'm not in the right place. My adoptive dad and I were very, very close. And he was very unconditionally loving and very chill. Being a child psychiatrist, he was a good listener. I was born quite the talker, and he was always down to listen. And my adoptive mom and I started having some struggles in our relationships pretty early on in our relationship. But I would say by my teen years, I was pretty like, I'm out of here, So that's when I entered a lot of crazy stuff and just kind of became the rebellious adoptee. And again, not thinking, I think back now and go, wow, all those times I was furious with my adoptive mom, it never occurred to me to say something horrible like, you're not even my real mother. And I said a lot of horrible things and I did some horrible things, but that never crossed my mind. So that's how much I would say like in the fog, just not even acknowledging that part of it. But we had our struggles. Fast forward, the family kind of imploded. I won't go into too many details around that, but it did involve my dad coming out of the closet, problems in their marriage, and I had my problems with my mother. So everything kind of blew up in a spectacular way, and our little family sort of disintegrated in a sense. We all kind of picked up the pieces, and over the years, I would say I just really wasn't thinking about searching, but a doctor, actually, a friend of the family, had kind of needled me about it. Was like, actually, she was my doctor. She was a friend of the family, became my doctor later. She's like, you really should think about looking for your birth mother at least, because you don't know your medical history, and it's really not okay for you not to know that. Which, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was kind of enlightened of that person. They were like, I think this is wrong. And so that's where it really started for me. So I was about 29 and I did a search for my birth mother, and it was spectacularly short. The intermediary found her in 5 minutes. She still lived at the same house, so when she got the paperwork, it was like, oh, here's a name. Oh, and here's the phone book. This was 1999, so it was before online. She just opened the phone book. There's the same name. There's the same address. Let me just call. And my birth mother answered. It was very quick. And we had a brief on the phone connection, which went south. I think that she wasn't ready. I think I wasn't ready. Looking back, I was just like, wow, she's really got some issues or something, or maybe I said the wrong thing at the wrong way, or, but I didn't really have all those tools and resources that there are now. Thank you, Haley, and everyone else out there who's put out so many resources. So I wasn't really prepared, and I was having all the weird feelings, and confusion within myself. And then I'm hearing this amazingly intense story, and then suddenly she kind of misinterprets something I said, which is understandable, actually, now, knowing what I know. And I think she just felt she had to protect herself. And then I was kind of like, well, that's good. That's fine. I shouldn't have done this anyway. We're all good. Learned a lot of things because I learned a lot of information. I'm good. I got my info. I'm out of here. All right. We're moving on with our lives. So until, I feel like everybody's story, doesn't it always, well, not always, but often land on, and then I had my own child.
Yes, I see where it's coming.
Now, I will say before that happened, I wasn't able to find out about my birth father because there was some confusion, I think, for her even about who the father was. So it was just, and we didn't connect long enough. And there was a clear boundary where, we weren't going to be in touch. So I wasn't going to hound her and try to figure it out. And I just thought, well, that's okay. I have my Black adoptive dad. I know that my bio dad's Black, but it was tickling my brain in a way it hadn't before. It was like, okay, well, I know all this stuff about her, but I don't know anything about him. So that was the first little, like that it wasn't just going to go away. And I remember my intermediary saying to me at the time, she was adopted. She helped lots of people search. And she said, she was more upset than I was at the time, in a way. She was like, oh no, because she loved bringing healing to birth mothers in particular. She thought she would be all about the adoptees, but it turned out she just saw so many birth mothers kind of release all that shame and secrecy. And so she was really kind of like, shoot, But she said, these things have a way of just, once you've opened the door, the story's not going to end now. It could be years, but the door's been cracked, and that moment of hearing like my birth mother's name and all that internal shift. And even if I wasn't ready, it did open a door. And so when I had my son, I remember reaching out at different points, trying to maybe contact little bits of the family, but then saying, no. I'd learned I had another brother who was given up for adoption, and I almost tried to find him. And then I thought, that's going to be awkward. No, I'm not in touch with my birth mother, our birth mother. So didn't do it. But it was percolating. And then 2011. So now it's like 12 years after that initial phone call where I did learn a lot about the family and the name and everything. Unusual name, by the way. I had spoken to my then 8-year-old brother, who she did raise, not the one that was relinquished, but another son that she had actually raised. And he was much younger, 20 years younger than me. And I had briefly talked to this 8-year-old. And a friend said, what about that 8-year-old? How old is he now? And I was like, 21? Oh my gosh. And long story short, my adoptive father's goddaughter was friends with him on Facebook. She was totally surprised that I was adopted, like many people were. You're not adopted. Yes. How are you related to this guy? My brother. She's like, wait a minute, what? And so anyway, they were the same age. So she acted as an intermediary and I got in touch with him. So that was an important point for me because at first I didn't know if I wanted to, but I'd seen some videos of him on YouTube. He was very intriguing and really smart and accomplished, and I just couldn't resist. And he knew all about me. He remembered, and he wanted to be in touch, and that he was going to tell his birth mother, but I asked that we meet first. And then he just kind of didn't get around to it. He kept not getting around to it because he was waiting for the right time. And then my grandmother died, my bio grandmother, and it was never the right time. He moved away and just the years rolled by. We didn't see each other that often, but we developed a relationship. This was in 2011, so now 5 years has gone by past that. It's 2016, and my other brother shows up. The laws in Washington state changed. He was here in the state. And by the way, my young brother also was here in Seattle. So he was here. He was going to school at the same university I was working at. He lived a few blocks from my office. So my birth mother lived in the same city. So this was all like, wow. So I find out that my other brother has shown up. He's reached out. He's contacted my birth mother and my other brother. And he briefly went into a reunion with our birth mother and then just, again, not ready. It just wasn't the right time. Very overwhelming, I think, for her and just a lot, So didn't quite go that well, but it wasn't like a blow up or just kind of didn't really work right then. So, but I got to know him a little bit. And so now I have this connection, and it felt really remarkable to find out there was another sibling, that had also been relinquished. And so we kind of bonded around that. He's only a year younger than me and lives in the city. So that was really great. That was 2016. It happened to be the same year I put my DNA in at Ancestry.
But why did you choose to do DNA? Because it wasn't necessarily to search, right?
Correct. I was not trying to search. I am, I'm telling this adoption story, but my life path has been very circuitous. If I were to spend time on my career, you'd all be left scratching your heads because I've taken many twists and turns. But one of the things, there's been many constants in my life, and one of them has been travel. Love travel. And one of them, I have done web design, I've done freelance writing, I worked as a researcher at university for many, many years part-time, but I always created a life in which I could travel because that's why I did lots of side hustles, I guess they call it now. I was the queen of the side hustles starting way back in like the late 90s because I did not want to work a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So I could travel, longer weekends, that kind of thing. So I joined Ancestry because I was... at that time, I'd learned how to really travel hack and rack up miles and points, and I was traveling for free a lot. And I just had this thing about, I want to travel, and this was before the whole DNA travel trend became kind of a thing, but I just knew that, I would really like to travel to where I'm from. I knew from my conversation with my birth mother all those years ago and from my now connection with, her son that she raised, I knew a lot about where I was from. I had always known I was Irish and Italian. Later pinpointed that to Sicily, further pinpointed it to a small town in Sicily, which was actually a refuge for refugee Albanians in the 1500s. So sure enough, my DNA shows not that I'm Italian, but I'm Albanian. Also knew that I was part Scottish, well, Irish, actually. My birth grandmother was born in Scotland, but all of her ancestors were Irish. And so I knew these things, and I really wanted to go to those places. I started thinking about that. Like, I want to go. Well, I did go to Ireland briefly, and I've been to Scotland, Edinburgh. So I was starting to get this idea like, ooh, I really want to do that. I want to go to where I'm from, but who knows about the Black side? And anyway, even if I knew my Black family, it's the double whammy, right? It's like adoptees and Black folks in the United States have almost like the same thing in common. Closed adoption adoptees and Black people. We don't know where we're from. We don't know who our people are. So even if I found my Black family, I knew that nobody was going to tell me, oh, this African country's in your DNA. So at the beginning of this, I thought, oh, is it possible that I could get at least a sense? Obviously West Africa, because I didn't know too. Maybe my birth father had come directly from Africa and they met in college, or well, not college, she was young, but you know what I mean? You don't know the story. So I just wanted to see. And the idea was to travel to where I was from in my DNA. And a lot happened. Like, I learned some things then. Of course, the estimates shifted as more people were doing it, right? The estimates of your ethnicity still shift. Like, they're always refining it. But at the time, there was a lot going on. Like, I don't know. It wasn't like I could just take off and start doing it, So I remember by 2018, there was some family stuff going on, and I was very distracted. I started my other podcast, that's the Globetrotter Lounge, and I was wanting to travel more and travel longer periods of time. Dreamt of taking time off for a year and traveling, and I would do this DNA travel, but didn't know how I would do it. And somewhere in there, about 2018, my really close girlfriend who was also adopted, who also, her dad was a colleague of my adoptive father. She and I grew up friends, and she had found her family, her birth family, and she started sending me stuff. It was kind of, I wouldn't say annoying at first, but it was like, why are you sending me these things? It was like...
I wouldn't say annoying.
Out of the fog type stuff, like, hey, so did you know that this, affects adoptees in this way? Or, just these little articles. And then the clincher was when she sent that Paul Sunderland video that, I have no problem saying openly that I definitely struggle with alcoholism, and which is in my family line. And I actually got sober a long time ago. I'm very fortunate that I had my last drink at 21 years of age. So I saw that video and I'm like, now hold on a second, because he was talking about the disproportionate, numbers of adoptees who have problems with substances and other addictive behaviors. And that was the thing that just, I don't know, something snapped in my brain. And I was like, okay, you know what? Relinquishment did matter. Like, it just really hit me. And all of the things, I've done a lot of work over the years, lots of different therapies. And, I'd had my issues. I used to have a lot of anger management issues. Surprise. Just looking back through that lens, I was like, oh, God, you're kidding. Like, this whole time, it all just made sense. So that led to sort of this I know we might dive deeper into this, so I'll keep this short for the moment. You can ask me some questions if you want. But I started looking at those matches because my friend said, those ancestry matches, by the way, are your actual family members. And I don't know, I just hadn't really paid attention to them before. She's like, you see all those Black people in there? Those are your cousins. And so I was like, okay, well, great. I don't know what to do. I mean, I don't know what to do. She's like, message them. I'm like, fine. So I messaged a bunch of them, not knowing what to say. Now, no, I kind of said a bunch of things I wouldn't have, knowing what I know now. But anyway, most of them didn't write back right away. Or if they did, there was one who wrote back right away, Claudia. And she's like, hey, cousin. And we started to try to figure it out. Could not figure it out. It was like staring at a puzzle that we could not even begin to understand. I'm looking at her massive tree. Did anybody move west? Did anybody move to Seattle? Like, we didn't know how to do it. My friend gets on board, the one who started sending me all the adoptee stuff. She's trying to crack the code. We don't know. So also at this time, I'm listening to Adoptees On. And I'm just starting to binge listen. And it's getting out of hand. No, it was great. But it was really enlightening. And so I'm starting to I join an adoptee support group. Like I'm, reading books. I'm getting deep into this. And it's becoming more and more important. And so I think that's what led me to really start at really in earnest. And got a little new match. Someone else responded. And her dad was willing to test. And he came back a first cousin. And I'll pause there, but I'll just say that led to the detective hunt that then consumed my life. And that was by the end of, I think it was summer of 2019, that first cousin match, that when he was willing to test. It took a year for us to get it together and for him to actually, I finally sent him a kit, got really proactive. I'm like, look, just spit in this tube. And he's like, okay, fine. And we'd only talked once on the phone before that, a year before. And he did. And he was my first cousin. And he had been born in Seattle. So I was like, okay, here we go. And we started this whole thing that had a lot of twists and turns. Me and my friend were on the phone daily, texting multiple times a day, into the night, building trees. We became genetic genealogists. We started listening obsessively to a podcast about how to do that. Became genealogy nerds at this point and cracked it. We solved it, found my bio dad. And I had a moment of hesitation before I reached out to that man because I didn't know what all had really gone down all those years before. What had he, was this a rape? Was this what happened? Do I want to know him? But I went for it and it all really worked out amazingly well. Much more than I ever could have anticipated. So I'm in full reunion with my Black bio family who all live here in the Seattle area. There's many of them. And it's been an interesting journey, and I'm about to embark on finally the DNA travel I wanted to start doing. So I've joined other DNA databases, including African Ancestry. I'm waiting for those results because he had to be tested, not me. That's a whole other story. So I'm just going to pause there for a minute and see if you had any thoughts or questions, because I feel like I've just been talking nonstop. I don't even know how long.
I love a talker. It's less work for me, right?
I think it's genetic. I've been told that the gift of gab runs in both sides of my family. So there you go. Sorry. Or yay.
Oh, yay. I'd say yay for me. I love that you tested DNA and were literally looking more for countries and ethnicity estimates. And your friend had to be like, no, you're like, those are people that are in your family. Like, she had to connect the dots for you.
I was travel obsessed. What can I say?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't know it was that. It's hard for me to almost remember now my mindset, but I didn't really get the DNA thing, I think. I mean, I did, but I guess I felt like, well, the ethnicity estimates, those must be match estimates. And it's like, she's like, no, that's actually the part of this whole thing that is undeniably true, is the DNA matching. That's actually the biggest power. I think, the companies market as like, know where you're from. Oh, find out your percentages and da 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 da. And they're pretty accurate, but honestly, they're not that accurate. It's like they're basing it on algorithms and the DNA matching. That's hardcore. Like that's actually, no one's like, surprise, give your family the gift of a DNA kit and possibly blow up your family because whoops, your dad's not your dad. Hey, they don't advertise that.
No, they don't. There is fine print that includes that. As I recently found out.
Yes, it's there, but you don't see it on the TV ads or the radio ads.
No. Can you? I don't exactly know how to word this question, but you mentioned that you are, your biological father is Black and your biological mother is white, and that was mirrored in your adoptive parents.
Mm-hmm.
So did you, let's talk about that growing up, having a Black father, and then finding Black family, because I think your adoptive dad was an only child as well, right? You're an only child. Yes. You have an only son.
Yes.
Only child.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that part. And then I don't know if you can expand on that. What is it like now to be a part of a biologically family that is Black and exploring that?
Yeah. I think, first of all, growing up in Seattle, it's like, I don't know, 6 or 7% Black here. It's not a very Black city, I would say. I remember when I first went to DC, I was like, whoa, wait a second. Because I just always thought about politicians in Washington, DC. And then I went with my adoptive dad one time and I was like, you didn't tell me, Papa, that there's so many Black people. He just laughed. He's like, of course, he grew up on the East Coast, right? So he's like, why would she not know that? But I was like, there's neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. Like I was just overwhelmed with the numbers. So I just want to say that because the first context of my experience is that I live in a city doesn't have a ton of Black people. And then my adoptive dad was someone who was pretty amazing. He broke barriers and, he was like one of the first Black people to attend University of Virginia, period, let alone in the medical school. And he's now like in a book about that. And, he was like segregated when he went to go eat. He had to circumvent major obstacles in the South at the time, in the segregated South. So he moved out here because it was suggested to him to kind of, why don't you just get out of here? Like, this is horrible, So he came out here and then, so he landed in like a white world where he got a lot of opportunity and all his colleagues were white and all his friends were white. You know what I mean? And then we grew up in like this fairly nice area of town, very white. And then I have this French Canadian mom. So like, she's not even tuned into the Black, white race, just, she came from another country. She's very like, oh yes, my daughter's Black and she's trying to expose me to some experiences, but she doesn't even get some of the subtle nuances of like the drama in this country. And so I'm kind of growing up in this like bubble of like, it's great to have someone I look like, but he's not really like giving me the Black experience, I would say, 100%, except for that he's a Black man. So I'm learning, his life is a valid Black person's experience, but I'm not seeing some other kinds. And so for me, also him being an only child, so I didn't have aunts and uncles. And his family was on the East Coast and they were not many left. Like there were actually a lot of them, but he grew up not connected to his dad's side. His parents split up when he was 3. So he was raised by his mother. And on that side, they happened to not even, I think he had one cousin who died young. That was it. So he didn't even have like extended family. His dad's side, there were a ton of them, but they were all fractured and didn't really, he just kind of didn't look back. It was like he left the South and it was gone, and his mother came out for her later years. So I got to know her a little bit, but she was kind of reserved and I was young, I was teen. I just wasn't paying attention. So I just felt a lot of times like that mixed girl who didn't quite get the Black thing, whatever that was. And sometimes I would be in situations with a lot of Black people and I'd be like, there's something I don't know. Why are people telling me I talk white? Why are people accusing me of trying to be better than them because I'm white skinned? Like I didn't really know what to do with all of that. So I had a lot of drama around that, ups and downs, and I won't go into the whole the whole thing. But there were experiences I had that were fairly upsetting, both from occasionally like the white side and the black side, people just kind of racism, judgments for both sides. So I felt pretty fried on that. And then I had dated a number of different type of people, fell in love with and married my husband who's white. So then I went through a big crisis about that in my 20s, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, where do I fit? Have this multiracial family myself. And so I think for me, I went through my own journey, and I would talk about it with my adoptive dad. And he always just said, be who you are. You're a human first. Like, just be who you are. If people don't like you, that's their problem, which was great. But I also I finally found connection through dance. I did a lot of naturally drawn to dance my whole life. And I did a lot of performing, and a lot of stuff was by default. I just would end up in like hip hop, African, some jazz, but mostly Afro-rooted things. I started a Brazilian samba dance company and did that professionally for a long time on the side, and went to Brazil, felt like a Brazilian, looked like a Brazilian, kind of claimed that identity. And so I got in touch with my blackness in those ways. Funny enough, it was women in travel that really slingshotted me into I really felt like I found my people. A lot of black women travelers that I really love and have connected with. And as I've gotten older, I cared less. Ironically, the more black I felt, like I just stopped trying to be anything. I just claimed who I was, and it all was working out. But when I found my black bio family, which happened around the time that sadly my adoptive dad died at the end of the year that I identified who my biological father was in 2020, right when the pandemic started. And my adoptive dad died, not of COVID, but he had heart failure. He was 84, and he just suddenly kind of took a turn and was gone at the end of that year. And so I was getting to know my black family, and like I said, they're huge. And I don't know, it just really felt like I was already feeling very much comfortable with who I was. And I'd made it all these years. I mean, I'm 52. Oh my gosh, I just turned 52. So I'd already come to my own peace around a lot of things. But that just really I don't know, I started feeling like, oh yeah, no, this is home to me. Like, just a big black family. I'd never had a big family, period. And all these aunties, all these uncles, I can't even tell you. My bio dad was one of 11 children. And then there's the people that knew them since they were kids, and everyone calls them aunties, auntie and uncle, and then there's all my cousins. And then they have these huge barbecues where there's not one smoker going. There's 2 or 3 barbecue smoker things going, and they're ribs, and they're throwing down, and it's 120 people. And literally, my husband would be the only white person there. And they all love him, by the way, because he's great. But it's just been really a piece of me that was missing that I did not realize until they were there. And I wasn't seeking them out for that. But also, I look like them. And to see myself, I look like the still very revered matriarch of the family, my biological grandmother. I look a lot like her. And so it's understanding where my face comes from, understanding who I am at a deep level that I think other adoptees in reunion understand. That's hard to even express. But yes, added to it is this piece of walking in 2 worlds, walking in multiple worlds, and really feeling like I'm coming home into my identity, my black identity. And finding out about my ancestors on that side now that I can has been profound. It's been profound for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us about your podcast? And I know you're going to be doing a deeper exploration of these things, bringing in the genealogy, DNA travel through a thing you're working on right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the first part of that was my podcast. So I've been the host of the Globetrotter Lounge podcast since the beginning of 2018. It's currently coming to the end of its 4th and final season. And it's been an amazing journey. It's been interviewing women who have found creative ways to travel more. I think I mentioned that I had found my way to travel more, which was miles and points. But I still felt like who are these women who are like living abroad and selling their homes and traveling straight for a year and then coming back, or like traveling slow travel? I'm doing the in and out, week in Edinburgh, 5 days over here. I went once to New Zealand for 4 days. That was crazy. It was for work, but I didn't stay longer. Why did I do that? Why did I not stay longer?
I don't know, because that's a long flight.
I know. I think that was at the end of a year that I had traveled so much that I was like, I just need to go home. So it was too frenetic. It was like I was doing these fits and starts. So I wanted to hear from women and hear how they did this other kinds of travel. And it was really eye-opening. International pet sitting, house swapping, all kinds of things, study abroad, So that's what that show was about. Now, actually, I was selling an online course. That's how it started, about miles and points. But then I quickly discovered I loved podcasting, and I kind of almost didn't care if I was selling anything. I just wanted to talk to people on a podcast. So also got me deep in the women in travel community. So that's where that's what that podcast is about. I felt like I did really well with that. I really found it very rewarding. And then all of this stuff's happening, as you know, so that was 2018, but by 2019, 2020, I'm off on this DNA rabbit hole. I'm listening to your podcast around the clock. I'm listening to other adoptee things I'm reading. So I'm kind of like now becoming like adoption stuff obsessed as much as I am travel obsessed. And so I ended up really saying, you know what, this is really what I want to do now. I really want to travel to the places where I'm from. And that was where I started germinating this idea. And I started really being able to, I don't know, when the pandemic hit and a lot of people, unfortunately, were struggling for work. I was a web designer at the time. My work was booming. So I was able to set aside some money. I thought, I'm going to maybe be able to not freelance. I'll still have my 3-day-a-week web job at the university, but I could do some travel. Maybe I can make it work. I won't freelance for like a year. Anyway, my adoptive dad passed away at the end of that year, and bittersweet blessing is I was left a little bit of money that allowed me to set aside some of that, like I would have if I would have saved up for a long time and then taken a year to travel. I was able to inherit a little bit to make it possible to fund travel for myself, DNA travel. So I've taken the leap and put a pin in working. I just ended my work for a few years. I haven't gone independently wealthy. I am going to go back to work, but I'm taking what I like to call a travel sabbatical, and I will be traveling slow travel. I'm not like moving away. I'm just slow traveling specifically to go to the places my ancestors are from. And now I know so much more because I knew my birth mother's side. I was missing my birth father's side. And there were some interesting discoveries on that side too, just things they didn't even know, so that has been it's like a dream coming true. And I really feel like it's funded by, again, my adoptive dad. I was so close to him, and I'm going to get emotional, but he's still guiding me and supporting me. He's very supportive about all these things too. So I'm just really excited about it. And I plan to, because I love podcasting, I plan to record as I go and interview people. At the least, I want to record for myself, because honestly, the story of finding my bio dad in particular with so many twists and turns, I'm just going to have to write a book like I feel like the adoptee memoirs are endless. I mean,
we need more. It doesn't matter.
Okay. But there's so many crazy twists and turns that even when I tell people even little bits of it, they like spit out their juice or whatever when they're listening, and they're like, "Are you serious? Are you making that up?" I'm like, "No, I could not make this up." And so I need to record because I just don't want to write that much. So I'm lazy. So I'm going to record as I go and collect interviews, and from hopefully as I'm doing my genealogical research. I mean, I'm in search of enslaved ancestors. That's hard. That's hard work. It's hard to find people. I'm also going to, on my white side, going to the little town in Sicily where the refugees, Albanians, fled to in the 1500s. I want to talk to some historians there. Get a translator. I don't know. So I just want to gather all of this. And at the worst, I'll have it for a book someday. At the best, I hope and want to release a limited series kind of show, podcast show. Think, more of an audio documentary style NPR type story when I'm back from my travel sabbatical. So I'll be interviewing family members and stuff like that too.
So exciting. Okay, so I kind of buried the lead in this one because Lisette and I are friends, and we met, I think, because you became a Patreon supporter a number of years ago.
Yes.
And you booked a call with me and we chatted podcasting, and it was so fun because I love podcasting. You know, I do like podcast coaching now because it's like super fun for me. I mean, you get it, right? You get the bug and you're like, this is it.
Yep.
This is the thing I love to do. And so to find another adoptee podcaster who wants to talk about the challenging things, the ups and downs, search, reunion, the family dynamics. I mean, it's hard. Like, we're delving into hard topics. And I've seen you over the last few years unpack a lot of things. And I almost felt, and then you started a podcast mastermind. So we've been doing that as well for, I don't know, at least a year.
Right.
Feels like.
Yep. I think so.
I feel like your views on adoption have shifted as you've navigated these last couple years. You're nodding at me. People can't see.
Yes, I am nodding heavily.
But my hope for Adoptees On, I started it for myself because I wanted to talk to people who were going through the similar things to me so they could tell me I wasn't crazy. Like, you're not alone. This is hard stuff. And it can't just be me. It can't just be my voice. And there's more and more adoptees speaking up, and there's more and more podcasts and things. But when I think of Adoptees On, and when I think of what kind of legacy the show will have, I don't know, it's going to be episode 200 and something. I don't know what. I can't believe it. I've been podcasting for over 5 years, and just like hundreds and hundreds of hours of recordings on here and Patreon. But when I think of legacy, I wanted to always include more voices. And I always wanted to have more people participate because people always want to be on the show. And it's just me over here. But as the show has built and grown, and as more people have supported on Patreon, like, I'm able to actually see this legacy of like, the show could be something that's not just Haley's voice, that's more and more and more. And so I've asked Lisette if she would guest host some episodes for 2022. And I've hinted at it on the main feed. I've shared a little bit on Patreon for the last, 6 months. We've been kind of talking about it. And whenever I bring it up, people get very nervous. They get really, really nervous. And they're like, what do you mean you're not going to do an interview? What do you mean? Which is it's nice. It's like, it's a nice feeling, but also I'm just one human person. It can't always be me. And I'm so excited that you are going to be doing some interviews. Now, you haven't done any yet. They're coming very soon. How are you feeling stepping in to do some episodes for Adoptees On?
Well, I have to say it's kind of amazing and surreal a little bit, because I just remember so clearly being sent the first podcast episode I listened to, of Adoptees On, and being like, wow, and being such a fan and joining and all this. So to be sitting here talking about this, first of all, just to be on the show, I'm like, hey, I'm on the show right now. This is cool. But then it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're asking me to do this? This has been incredible. And I am nervous about it. I'm not going to lie. I think I've told you that a few times. I've hosted, not only did I have my podcast, but I also was the host of another podcast, the Navit podcast, for a while. I helped this company start a podcast. And so I was the host for a whole season. So I've hosted 2 shows, and I've produced 2 shows, and I've, know a lot about podcasting at this point, I like to think. But there's something about this podcast that feels so Haley. Hello. Can I just say that? That I'm thrilled to be asked. I'm excited to do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I fill these shoes? And then you were like, well, you're not really filling the shoes. You're just adding your voice. And I thought, oh, okay, that's Yes, thank you. So I'm very excited to support you because I think that's what I always come back to instead of it being like, oh no, are they going to like me? How am I going to do? What's going to happen? It's like, wait, I'm doing this for Haley. Like Haley needs support and would like to try something different. And so I'm very excited to be able to help in that way and see, what comes from it. So yeah.
I'm really excited too, Lisette. And I know you've expressed being nervous to me, but I mean, I've heard so many episodes of your other podcasts. You're an excellent interviewer, and it can't be from my point of view all the time. There's, let me tell you, there's been so many episodes I've uploaded and been like, I don't know if that one, I don't know if I hit the mark. And then people will be like, oh, that was my favorite episode. I'm like, okay. So, bringing my lens, it's not always, it's not always the best episode it could be. So I'm really thrilled to have another perspective. I also so sad that our interview felt so short because I was like, oh no, I have like 3 hours more worth of questions written down here. I don't think I asked you one question from my sheet, but people will get to know more of you as you share some of yourself in the interviews with the people that we've chosen. I think that's really special. And I'm so honored to get to bring you to the Adoptees On community in this way. I just think it's really a special thing. And I appreciate you sharing how you've unpacked, let's use the term coming out of the fog and looking back. And I also love how you talk about your dad. I mean, I'm really sorry for your loss. And I remember when he passed and I was like, oh, I know how close you were to him. And so I really appreciate you sharing about him and your relationship with him. And it's an honor for us to get to see that too, I think. And
thanks.
So yeah, I have lots of big feelings about all of it. I'm nervous alongside of you, but I absolutely am also so excited. This was my baby. And you get to come and I was gonna say mother alongside. I'm like, you get to babysit. Yeah.
No, it's really such an honor. Really, I truly am still sort of like, pinch me, like what's happening. But yeah, I just really am excited to dig into some conversations, and really that's what it's about, right? It's just helping to facilitate some conversations and having people on who, can share their experiences. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to helping to facilitate those conversations.
Wonderful. All right. Well, you will be hearing from Lisette over the next months. Here and there, we'll have a Lisette hosted podcast. And yeah, we'll tell you about it. How about next week's show? Will be your first show.
Exciting.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to do, of course, our recommended resources. So why don't you start? What's your resource for today?
So I had suggested a book, The Lost Family. It's called The Lost Family: How DNA is Upending Who We Are by Libby Copeland. It's a phenomenal book. I've read so many of the other, so many adoptee books, like I said, but I feel like I heard about them all on your podcast, so on this podcast. So I'm not going to rehash those. But this one really, of course, spoke to me just having found my bio family using DNA matching. And part of the story, which you'll have to hopefully get snippets of my story of that whole part of it, right? The DNA matching later. Like we said, we didn't have time today, but part of my story involves the whole NPE thing, the not parent expected. Other family members being brought into the family with me, for example, because I was matched to them. They thought their parent was whoever they thought it was. I'm on this DNA hunt. And I accidentally uncover that, oh, I'm so sorry, your dad's not who you think it is. You know what I'm saying? So, there was a lot of that going on. Fortunately, in my case, it was actually a positive experience for this person. But this book captures all of the drama that the DNA testing, matching how it's changing things across the country, across the world, especially in the United States right now. And there's a lot of good resources in there. There's a lot of fascinating stories. Of course, there are a lot of adoptee stories because, but I think it's just and a lot of NPE stories, not parent expected. And I just found it explains the DNA piece of it, the scientific part of it. And I think that's important too. And then it talks about genealogy and where that factors in. And I just found it fascinating. I just think if anyone's interested in how to do genetic genealogy, but also what this is all about, or maybe you've uncovered something accidentally in your journey trying to find your people. And what do you do about telling somebody like I had to, your dad's not your dad. There's a lot of personal stories about that. So anyway, I just think it's very well done, very well written, very well researched, and it's a great resource book.
Oh, thank you. I think that's going to be so helpful for a lot of people. And I was like, oh, I could learn a bit from that too. I think there's something, we actually are going to record a show about this, but I think there's something really empowering about adopted people doing DNA testing and knowing how to build our own trees and things. And the one show we did on DNA, I did it with Janet Weinrich Keel, and she kind of talked us through like all kinds of things. That was such a good episode. I can link to it in the show notes. But we talked about that, how we should know how to do our own stuff. If other people aren't going to tell us, we should know how to get it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm really excited about this resource I'm going to share with you.
Okay.
Brand new.
Yay.
Hot off the press when we're recording. Alice Stevens and Marcy Calabretta Cansabello have co-founded a adoptee literary festival. And we are starting up in April 9th, 2022. It's free, online, tremendous. I can't wait. It's really exciting. I know.
Wow.
The folks that you see on the organizing panel are all authors that we love and respect here. They are going to have multiple panels. So there's going to be a journalism panel, poetry panel, memoir panel, middle grade and young adult panel, a fiction panel, and then a keynote. And they're scattered at different times throughout the day. I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but it's adopteelitfest.com. And the Instagram handle is at adopteelitfest. So you are all invited to attend that.
Wow.
And then the recordings will be available after. I know. Doesn't that sound great?
That's amazing. Especially as someone who does want to write a book and just always wants to know all the books and then be able to hear what the authors have to say. I mean, this sounds phenomenal. So
yes, I'm really excited about it, cheering them on. And I hope you guys are able to register for that and support them. And I think they'll be announcing some books that are coming out this year. And of course, many of the authors have been on Adoptees On, which is pretty cool too. So awesome. I'm really excited to share that.
that's incredible.
Yeah. So Lisette, I guess we can connect with you through the show, but also where can we find you online and follow to make sure we keep up with your other plans for DNA travel? Oh God, help me. What's your Traveling My Roots? What's the name of your?
Yes, Traveling My Roots. Yes, I can be found a few places. So my moniker, my travel persona is Jet Set Lisette. Lisette with an S, Lisette. So you can find me at jetsetlisette.com, where my episodes for the Globetrotter Lounge are housed. I will say, and of course you can listen on all the podcast players as well, Globetrotter Lounge. I will say that this final episode, or this final season that's currently coming out, was really based a lot on my upcoming plans. So if there's any interest in what I'm doing, you could catch this season, because I talk a lot about sort of why I'm, the people I interview are doing things like I want to do, and I'll just leave it there. But you can also find me on Instagram and at Jet Set Lisette. But my new project is travelingmyroots.com. And then I'm on Instagram with hardly anything there yet, but Traveling My Roots, at Traveling My Roots, and on Twitter at Travel My Roots. I think that's all the things.
All the things. We will, of course, link to those, and we'll have those links every time you are guest hosting Adoptees On.
Thank you. So excited.
Same. Very excited. Thanks, Lisette.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a real pleasure.
shouldn't say that I've always had this huge dream of what Adoptees On could be, because I really did start it just so I could talk to other adopted people and feel like I wasn't alone. Because that's really how it started. Over time, as the show has grown and I have taken on more and more responsibility and have built Patreon to be able to, Patreon used to pay a babysitter when my kids were super duper little. And I would get a babysitter twice a week for 3 hours at a time. So they would come over and then I could work on the show. And so sometimes it was a time that most of the time it was editing time for me. And it just kind of built and built and built until I was like, oh my gosh, I guess I have a job now. Is this my job? Am I like a full-time podcaster? I've always done it like in the spirit of community building and, hoping the show could be helpful for others. And as it's grown and grown and grown, I'm like, oh my gosh, what could this look like in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now? Like, what does it mean to build a legacy project that is by adopted people, for adopted people, that says the true things about adoption, that helps people unpack their stories, that helps them if they feel like they need to be on a healing journey of some sort? What does that look like? It can't just be me. Like, who am I? I just started this show in my basement and I was talking to some of my Twitter friends and strangers and revealing all the ways I'm broken and have embarrassed myself so many times publicly and fallen on my face and made mistakes and said the wrong things and messed up. And like, what if I mess up and like, does the show lose all credibility? How do I keep this going without just me, just Haley? And so I thought, I need more adoptees working on the show, and that's only been possible through fundraising. I need more adoptee voices on the show, and I need other interviewers. I want this show to be full of adoptee voices that are not mine, that are from a wide range of experiences and expertise and passions and focus. And that means it's not always going to be me. And I just say that and it makes me want to cry because this is my baby. But you can trust me that all the decisions I've been making have always been in the best interest, in my opinion, for adopted people, for sharing our voices, and for us to have the microphone and to make our own platform, for us to have a say when we've never had one. So even though if you have become connected to me, Haley, over the years, and we've become online friends, and I go for your walk with you every Friday morning, or I have coffee with you on Mondays with our Patreon chats, or you take me hiking, or you wash dishes and cry in your sink with me, that means so much to me that I can be there for you. And so I hope you know that any person that I bring into a guest host role, like Lisette, or perhaps hopefully future friends, any of those people, I have done my very best to bring you people that I trust and will also uplift adoptee voices and our community, and that will continue on the legacy of Adoptees On, because I found I can't replicate myself and I can't do it all. And even though I've spent 5 years trying to do it all, it can't just be me on the other end of this mic. And so I'm so excited about Lisette, and I'm so excited to introduce her to you. And I also know I can trust you to love her and to love my guests just like you have been through these last 5.5 years we've been together. And so I'm confident that you are going to welcome in our new voices just as you have welcomed me into your earbuds. So thank you for trusting me. Thank you, Lisette, for trusting me. And I'm really excited to say that next week, Lisette will be hosting the show as our guest host. She has an interview with a very special person to her. And I'm really thrilled to share that with you next week. And then the week after, I will be back doing an interview, and you'll hear from her every few weeks or so until we have our summer break. So you can expect weekly shows just like normal. Sometimes it'll be Lisette, and most of the time it'll still be me, but you can expect also to just be hearing from more adoptees over time. And that's what I see as the legacy and future of Adoptees On. And if you are feeling some kind of way and really feel like, oh my gosh, I want Adoptees On to continue, I want this to still exist in the world, then come join us on Patreon. That's the way the show carries on and is able to still be here 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So adopteeson.com/community. And so you make sure I can pay my people like Lisette for guest hosting, and my editor and all the folks that are working behind the scenes to make sure the show shows up for you. adopteeson.com/community. And thank you so much for listening and trusting me. Let's talk again next Friday.